You've been a specialist in the field of media, businesses and brands. And prior to your entry into radio, you've been part of the television space as well. You've been with BCCL and Z Telefilm. So could you just walk us through your journey?
After graduating, I was very fascinated with this whole business of managing creativity. And as a result, I moved to advertising, where I enjoyed myself working on several brands for several years. And then, I was very keen to handle a P&L and really take business responsibilities. And the opportunity of running ZTV came my way. I think that was really a big milestone in my life and a big shift in terms of my career. And again, it was to do with the business of managing creativity. And subsequently, I have stayed in either radio or in television, because really that's what fascinates me. How do you bring processes and systems and analytical thinking where the output is creativity?
And how exciting is the media space in India right now? Do you see it as a lot of opportunity or lots of challenges?
So I think media is absolutely fascinating. A, it's a sunrise industry. B, it started barely 15-20 years ago, more or less as boutiques. So even when we're talking about a ZTV, it started with a dream of an entrepreneur or a visionary like Subhash Chandra. And similarly other organizations. And in the last 15-20 years, it's grown phenomenally. The whole entertainment space has grown hugely. At the same time, it is learning to grapple with processes and systems and best practices of management that need to be brought in. So I think for anybody who wants to have their left and right brains engaged in an industry or in a business, media would, I think, be an automatic choice.
Okay. What about the challenges? It can also be very draining, right?
Yeah, so it is very, very draining. As I tell my friends who run FMCG companies, that you ultimately have to sell your product once a month in that sense, okay? Or at that, when the housewife is going with the grocery list, that's the one time where you really have to impact her so that she then, buys your product. For us in media, we have to sell 24/7. So look at radio. If I don't keep my listener engaged every minute of the 18 hours that the station is live, she will switch off and go to some other station. So that every second of our lives, we have to be on top of it, on the ball in terms of keeping our listener engaged. And similarly, it is with any medium. You have to break the news the first. If you are part of the news medium, you have to present the analysis in a particular manner that that engages your reader or makes the reader think. So there are a huge amount of challenges, and of course there's a daily crisis, and because it's a live medium, so there are the good thing is you're kept on your toes all the time.
You've actually launched successful brands like Zoom,
yes,
right? India's first lifestyle television channel. And you also fashioned the relaunch strategy for ZTV, right? So would you then describe yourself as a pioneer? Would you dare to go where angels fear to tread?
So I think there is a certain romance to the word pioneer. I think I'm more of a startup expert, as well as somebody who loves scaling up businesses. So if I'm given a challenge, which is to either set up something or to take something which is small and scale it up, as we did with Radio City. I mean, when I took over, the revenue of Radio City is what the profit of it is today. So we scaled up 7x in the last 4 years. So that's really what I would define myself as, though I personally don't like to define or label myself or anybody, because I think if the moment you label, the moment you define, you restrict your life.
Okay. So you talked about strategy. So would you take us quickly through the strategy that you've developed for Radio City, which has paid such handsome in terms of mind share, in terms of also the actual balance sheet?
Okay, so I think the mistake most people make when they look at businesses is they just focus on the front end or the last connect between the business and the person who's buying the product. So a lot of media organizations, to give you an example, focus hugely on the revenue piece. So are my sales guys have I got a reasonably good product, and then are my sales guys, and drive the business really hard from the revenue angle. I think before the product, or before even the sale of the product, comes the creation of the product, and you have to be very clear of what is creating the product in different kinds of businesses. Okay, so sometimes it's the factory where you have to really or the innovation within a factory that you have to concentrate on. For us, especially in the media business, it's the people. The people define our product, and indeed for media, the people are the product. For radio, if you see, or even in the field that you have been, journalists, the people, what the journalist is, how good the journalist is the product. How good our RJs and our producers and our music managers are, make the product. So I think as a CEO, you have to be very clear about what are the drivers of your business. Sometimes it's innovation, sometimes, if of course it is the supply chain, sometimes it is the distribution. People end up getting confused or apply the same principles to different businesses. In media, it is very much the people. And therefore, I spent all my effort on creating a fabulous team, giving them an environment where they could succeed, or empowering them, or letting them have fun, own it and have fun, because only when they are, and it's a very young team that we have, our product is supposed to be an entertainment product. So if they themselves are not entertaining or being entertained or happy, how will they entertain somebody else? So I think our strategy would be really to recognize that the people are the product, and if I get that piece right, the product will fall in place. If I have a great product, automatically the revenues will come, which is the output. So input is really where I concentrated on. So at Radio City, we've spent, I think, some 5 to 7 years working on the culture of the organization, creating a new culture, and today it is a great place to work. For the last 4 years, it's been awarded as a great place to work. It's the best place to work in the media industry, and we compete with some very large media houses. It is, I think, in the top 25 across all businesses. So even compared to organizations like Google, etc., we are amongst the top 25, which is really an effort that has taken us 7 years.
So no issues like attrition, and these words don't exist.
So of course attrition is there. Attrition will, and indeed when competition first came in at a point when there were 20 stations in the country, to today there are close to 100 stations, and we were really the pioneers, and therefore the place where people would recruit from. So of course we have had attrition issues. Today, of course, with this Great Place to Work initiative, etc., the attrition is very, very low. It is amongst the lowest in the media industry. So, but more than attrition, which is just one evaluative parameter, I think the fact that our people are happy, they are engaged. More than half our organization is 5 years plus.
Okay.
What that does is the collective experience of the organization allows us to handle any challenges that come our way. So the experience that is there, residual in the organization, how to handle tough challenges, how to deal with good days, how to deal with bad days. We've dealt with some very tough days with the recession, etc. We know what to do, and that gives us, today, if we are amongst the most profitable radio stations in the country, in revenue, in spite of having larger number of stations to compete with, we are still amongst the top 2 in both listenership and revenue. I think it's because of that collective experience.
And the culture that you worked so
absolutely,
hard
absolutely.
to create.
Yeah.
You spoke a lot about, the mentoring. In many ways, you also mentored this team.
Yes.
Right? You've
yes.
been, apart from being the CEO, you have. And you speak extensively at institutes, at B-schools, at corporates, and these are issues that, across the spectrum, managing gender diversity or managing work-life balance and all that. So how important is, and you have a young team, so how important do you think is the education system, the feeder system to this transition? Do you think it's happening, or do you see large gaps? And if you see gaps, then where do you think the solution should be?
Okay. So, of course, there are positives and negatives to the Indian education system. Okay, so on the one hand, it teaches you hard work, it teaches you discipline, it teaches you to think logically, and especially I would talk about the IIM days here, where more than anything, it taught us through, whether it was our case studies or whether it was through, just the subjects that we dealt with, to think in a process oriented and logical fashion. And I think half the battle after a point in time is, can you link the various dots and create a strategy out of it. When I was talking to you just earlier about the input drivers, and so many heads of businesses make mistakes in selecting the wrong drivers, and once the business head selects a wrong driver, the whole organization goes off in the wrong route. So I think that logical thinking is something that, on process orientation, is what I really, to put everything in a grid. And once you put things in a grid, you are able to simplify complexity, which is again a huge challenge. There is so much complexity out there. How can you simplify it, prioritize the right things, focus on them? I think that's what the education system, especially at the IIM, taught me. Having said that, I think the big weakness in our education system, and I see that when my son is studying abroad, and I see that the ability to make you think on your own is limited. So we all know that we have learned by rote. Okay, so
the unlearning takes a lot of time.
The unlearning takes a lot of time, and also I find very few people who are equally good with handling the liberal art kind of subjects and the quant subjects. And I think, one of my strengths, for example, is this balance, this balance, and I find very few people having learned that through a normal.
The system doesn't encourage
that, give you the opportunity. So why can't, like my son is doing finance and psychology. Right. Why don't we have that option here?
Right. So IGCSE, I think, is trying to do that, but there's a lot of skepticism. There's still a lot of mindset issues, I guess.
But I think they should just persevere, because finally that is what we require in the business world.
Right. So a lot of time goes on training then? Are you saying that your team spends, or your core team spends a lot of time on training, making them come up to speed?
So I would say, the training is necessarily in the need gap in the what is going wrong in the education system. But the two types of training that we concentrate extensively on, of course, one is the functional training that is required. So the negotiation skills that are required for sales, or let's say voice training that is required for RGS. But beyond those functional training, a big aspect of training for us is the managerial behaviors. How do you become a good manager? Because in a young team, especially in a nascent industry such as media, there are not too many experienced managers. So at the middle manager level, we will find that they were great executives, but once they move to the management cadre, they are really not good team managers. And that's where the training and the culture of an organization cannot be defined by what happens at the top. It is when the top explains and envisions, and the middle manager understands and passes it down. So I can keep talking about the great culture at Radio City, but if the Coimbatore programming head is not inculcating those values within himself and downwards, there's no point of this culture. So that managerial training is where we spend extensive effort on.
Okay. And it's also, apart from the many hats that you wear, you've been president of the AROI, and which is the industry body for the radio industry. You've also been at the forefront of several industry resolutions, issues where there's royalty issue and all these things. So you think that advocacy is a very big part of your work, evangelizing, because it's a nascent industry, because these challenges are, they could actually wipe out an industry like this. So how much time, and how do you see yourself in this role of actually influencing policy?
So absolutely, I think it is the most critical part of my job right now. So the initial days of Radio City were really spent, as I was telling you, in scaling up, in building the team, in creating the culture. And so the first 4-5 years were really very inward looking. Today, for the last 5 years, I have had a fabulous team of heads of departments who are very operationally independent and run the business. In fact, I joke that I just need to come to office 2 hours a day and my work is done, because A, they've been around, they've got the experience, and they're doing a fabulous job. Most of my time today now is spent in two things: either in evangelizing this medium with advertisers, with other, including including with the ministers and the government and the policy drivers, because it is not only a nascent medium, it is one of the most regulated mediums in the country. Television and print have had far more freedom. For example, we are not allowed to carry news. So that's one, those are the things where we really spend a lot of time explaining to the policymakers that why we require to be given content independence, or spectrum to be given out to us. And given the policy paralysis and the issues we faced with the previous government, there was really a lot of head breaking against the wall that happened for the past 3 years, lots of frustration. Hopefully with the changes now and the new government, and we recently met the minister and he's very, very proactive and action oriented, and hopefully things will change. But coming back to your point, yes, I spend a lot of time there in advocacy, both with the government and with advertisers who are still not using the medium as much as they ought to. The other constituency that I spend a lot of time with is the adjacent industries that we need to work with. For example, the music industry. Right. So there was this 10-year royalty battle that went on, which we finally won in the Supreme Court, and that required a lot of legal effort. So I practically became half a lawyer as a result of and I can tell you everything about the Copyright Act now. So I spent a lot of time there. Today, for example, the other issue that we are facing is on digital. So digital is a very important part of our lives right now, both from our listeners' perspective, from our perspective, and we've launched something like 7 internet radio streams in the last 1.5 years. Now, what to pay as royalty on digital? What is the internet all about, and how to work with the music industry so that it's a win-win situation? That's the other part of evangelizing that we are doing now.
Right, and a lot of it is like going back to the drawing board and starting, right?
Absolutely.
Because you don't have any points of reference in that sense.
Absolutely right. Absolutely
right. What about
right.
the world over? I mean, do you have any lessons to learn from the radio industry in other countries and other developed markets?
So I think when Radio City was first set up, we did get in a lot of international experts, especially from the programming end, who sort of worked with us in designing the content and the clocks and how every hour should be. But over the years, we have matured, and you realize, as it happens in every industry, that there are certain peculiarities and unique aspects to this market. So you have to sort of do a amalgamation. So, which is what now we do on our own.
Okay. You've also, you've talked a lot about gender diversity. You've written this book, and it is on the national bestseller list, and you've been invited to several organizations to speak. First question, you are a woman CEO. So do you look at yourself as a woman CEO? And would you, what kind of do you think your journey is any different? Your challenges have been different, and what has it, really taught you, this entire business of, did you ever encounter a glass ceiling anytime in your life? Do you have tips to share? Your book has them, but would you like to reiterate them?
First thing is that no, I didn't face any glass ceiling. I didn't think of myself as a woman CEO or a woman manager even. I just was a good, and I think there are good managers and bad managers, and increasingly gender doesn't matter. Of course, there are some industries where, especially the manufacturing industry or certain parts of the industries where they are really, the sales part of it, etc., where women have come in a little later, because of biases or because of, the organization felt that was really not the space for them. Fortunately, in the media and advertising industry of which I've been a part, that was not the case. In fact, women were encouraged. And so I haven't faced any glass ceiling. Neither have I treated myself differently, nor do I treat any woman executive or manager in our organization or the organization that I've worked for any differently. as I said, a boss looks at you as a good professional or a bad professional. That's about it. Having said that, there are 2 points that I want to bring about. One is that while I do not think women need to be treated differently, and in fact they should be encouraged and made to be treated exactly on par with the male colleagues. There are certain points that come in a woman's life, which is really the childbirth period and all that, and there I strongly feel that organizations need to reach out with a helping hand. And I have seen that in my life, and I have seen it across organizations, that if you put in that effort as an organization in those 2-3 years where she's going through all that, by giving her flexi timing or giving creches in office or allowing her to work from home, etc., etc., you will end up ensuring that she stays within the and grows, stays within your organization. There is loyalty. You get a great worker out of her. So those 2-3 years, I feel she needs to be treated a little differently. So that's one part. The other part which I want to make very strongly, and which is really the reason for my book Lady You Are Not a Man, which I wrote, was this whole thing that I think for organizations are doing a lot today. There was a point maybe 20 years ago where women had to, and in fact our seniors, women who worked before us, in the generation before us, had to really work hard to break the glass ceiling. And they were the true pioneers, and we must all be grateful to them. Last decade, I have seen organizations really put in a lot of effort to ensure that women stay on. And I think they've realized that if they don't look at women differently or don't put in that extra effort, they're losing 50% of the talent pool. And today you can't afford to do that. So I see organizations have stepped up and done many things to ensure that there are gender-friendly policies. However, the proportion of women in corporate India still remain the same.
At senior positions.
30% enter the workforce, 15% stay till middle manager, then there's 5% and then 1%. And that's why you see very few women CEOs like me.
Or on the board.
Or on the board, or director level. At the top level, there's hardly anybody. Now, the one thing is to say that let's have reservations for women. The New Companies Act recommends that there should be a woman director on the board, etc., etc. I think the challenge is not there. The challenge is when the 30% is falling to 15%. If the pipeline is only not there, what do you expect board chairmen to do? Where will they pick up women from? So I've tried to address that challenge through my book, and the challenge is really trying to tell those 30% women that don't leave. Why is your number falling down to 15%? And that's where I feel that women themselves are giving up. So my whole message is that, women like us who have reached the top, we are not special. We didn't have any special opportunities or some great mentors or some very specific talent which you don't have. Every woman has the same talent. Why did we reach there, and why did the other women didn't, in spite of having the same skill set, is because they just gave up.
Perseverance is what you're
I think perseverance is the only difference between us and them. There is nothing else.
Yeah, but personally, how hard has this perseverance been? I mean, I'm sure there have been days when, we all ask ourselves, is this really worth it?
I think that that happens to every woman at every, and especially at the point when they have small children. So when I've gone and spoken at these various organizations, or when women have read my book, the maximum number of calls or letters I have got is around this whole guilt issue. So you feel your kid is crying and saying, "Mummy, don't go to work," and that's the time you
have a
you have that moment where you say, is it worth it? And you want to give up and say, and especially if you're having a tough time at work, you turn around and say, nothing is worth, leaving a crying baby at home. You have support system issues. There's nobody, you have to leave in a creche. So you feel extremely guilty. So it's not that I've not had those moments. I mean, I still feel guilty because, a large part of my son's childhood, he was brought up by my mother. So I still feel, he's 20 years old now, but I still feel guilty about, having. But I think at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, which guilt are you more comfortable?
And what makes you a happier person?
What makes you a happier person? Which guilt are you more comfortable living with? Right. Are you okay? Because 10 years later, what's going to happen? And that's the second number of letters that I get, second highest number of letters. Women have left and they want to come back, and they're not finding it easy. Right. So they say, oh, corporate India is so cruel to us. We want to come back after 8 years of having. So I said, which organization will recruit you after 8 years?
And what have you done to keep
yourself abreast?
Yeah,
absolutely,
that's
absolutely.
Because when you're ready, there is such a dearth of talent. you try to hire, but then you find that there's this huge gap, and
And they have not upgraded.
Running.
Correct,
you don't have time to train a experienced resource.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I think that's also the onus on
the woman. So
right?
increasingly, my point is, organizations are doing a lot. What are you doing? How much control are you taking of your own career?
Right. So, and you've done this book. It's met with a fabulous response. So one more in the pipeline.
So I don't see myself as an author. I see myself as a person who had a message to give. And when I saw all these women who wanted to, be successful in all parts of their lives but couldn't figure out how to do it, I thought that there were some lessons I had learned from my own life or having watched other women which I wanted to share. So this book was more about the message, and I think that's why it's resonated, because women tell me, how did you pick up a slice from my life and write it down? Because it's ultimately a story of every woman. Correct. So certainly, as of now, this book is, the lectures around the book and the time that I spend talking or mentoring or guiding young women is taking up a lot of my time. If there is something more that comes out, then
more
I'll
stories.
See. Yeah, more stories, or there is some more challenges that I want to discuss, which I have not discussed in the first book. I think that's when
you talked about the 30 to 15%, perhaps the 15 to 5%.
Yes, maybe.
That's where you are, really.
Yes,
so
yes,
I think,
yes. What happens there?
Good to have,
maybe.
And a lot of young women setting out, with media in mind, have very glamorous images.
Yeah.
They don't realize it's a lot of hard work.
Yes.
So
yes.
I think a book like this should be mandatory. It says the actual sweat behind the glamour.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What about career-wise? I mean, you've 4 years at Radio City. You've achieved your dream of really growing the organization, creating this great culture. So what next? Have you?
So actually, I've spent 9 years with Radio City.
Okay.
So it's been a decade,
4 years
really.
as CEO?
No, all 9 years as CEO.
Years
Yeah.
CEO.
In fact, I became CEO in 2001 when I took over as ZTV. So it's been a long stint of running organizations. So, the other day somebody said a very interesting thing. He said that I think we need to look at ourselves and see how we are growing as individuals, and the other thing we have to see is at over time how we are maximizing the impact we have on people. And if we can do both, grow as individuals and fulfill our potential, as well as maximize impact over time on our surroundings, we'd really have lived a full life. So I see that I have done well in my career, grown as an individual. As I said, I was in fact the youngest CEO of my batch, and things progressed very well. At Radio City, I think I've made a big impact, especially in creating a unique culture. With the book, now the impact is increasing to beyond Radio City, to women. I'd like to take that further in some way if I can, that how do I help influence in a positive way more and more and more women, so that ultimately they all stay on in the workforce.
Okay. And reinventing yourself has been it's become now part of your DNA, is it?
Yeah, so that's again very interesting, because I remember very long ago I attended a lecture by Charles Handy, who said that, so whether you're a brand or an individual, or an organization, you start off, and if you get things right, you move up, okay? And once you cross the peak and are on the downward side of the slope, that's when you say, oh, I need to reinvent. Actually, reinvention needs to be done just before you hit the peak, because then only you'll go to the next level and the next level and so on. And that is so right.
True.
When brands start doing badly and sales then they start saying, what do we need to do? Vis-a-vis, when the brand is saying, now I'm going to stagnate, what do I need to do? Those are really successful people and successful brands. And I think I've done that. So even when I was in advertising, and I became a media director, and then you see that beyond this you'll be a bigger media director of a bigger organization, but there's no more growth in that sense. And that was still to come. I hadn't hit the top there. And that's when I joined ZTV. So in ZTV and in Zoom, I was really a professional CEO, in the sense of running a business for somebody else. Again, I spent 4 years in those organizations, but I still hadn't reached the top there, when I realized that just working for somebody rather than being a quasi entrepreneur, which is when I made the shift to Radio City, because Radio City is owned by a private equity fund. So
yeah,
and we are indeed, quasi entrepreneurs in that sense, and that's how the fund also expects you to run your organization. So it became an entrepreneurial journey for me. So that's the reinvention that, at least if somebody would ask me what are you most happy about in your career, I would say that constant reinvention is
the ability to foresee also.
Yes, and absolutely. And now again, I have yet not hit the peak in being an entrepreneur. I'm looking at social impact now.
Okay, right. So that is really
reinvention again.